Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to this week's episode of the Flower Lounge. I'm really excited to have this week's guest, Arielle Hayat. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have her on the show is because really, by coincidence, we have now we're having 3 generations of herbalism on the show. And you may not have known this, Arielle, but I interviewed David Winston, who taught Richard Mandelbaum, who you're now studying with, right?
Yes.
So I find this really fascinating in terms of the plant world and how, there's thousands of different plants, and we could study herbalism our entire lives and never feel like we, hardly scrape the surface. And so to have the honor and pleasure of interviewing 3 generations of herbalists and how they bring their practice in the world is really fascinating. So let me just tell you a little bit about Arielle before we jump in. She is a clinical herbalist from Arbor Vitae School of Traditional Herbalism in New York, where she's currently working on her clinical education. She apprentices.
I just finished this last May.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right, because I went to the graduation.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, I know. I still say that I'm in it, but it's true. It just happened.
So you're a clinical herbalist, period.
Actually, yeah.
And she works at the oldest medicinal shop in Manhattan, which we visited, and we saw each other there as well. Last time I was in New York at the Flower Power Herbs and Roots. And she focuses on the 6 steps of healing of the wise woman tradition. So she is in a position to empower and guide a ton of people in the city, in her community, towards a healthier lifestyle that focuses on wellness from the inside out. She also has a private consultation practice. She teaches weekly workshops at the Wellness Haven at the Alchemist Kitchen. And her education in plant medicine weaves the methodologies of Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, Native American, European herbalism, and the wise woman tradition to nourish mind, body, and soul of her clients. And her specialty really lies in helping the body adapt to stress, healing mental wounds caused by the effects of tension and anxiety. And she also sees clients with issues related to gut, digestion, adrenals, and hormones. So through their work together, Arielle's clients rediscover their inner peace and experience profound emotional and physical transformation, which we are all about. So super excited to have you. Thank you for being here, Arielle.
Thank you for having me.
So we usually start with a really short childhood exercise where we just ask you to close your eyes and go back to a time in your childhood when you played around flowers or plants and see if you can identify a favorite or whatever pops in your mind, and just think about what you were doing at the time and who you were with, and reflect on 3 words that you would use to describe the personality of your favorite flower or botanical at that time. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and tell us all what you were thinking about, what you were up to, and the 3 words.
3 words. Summery, tasty, and uplifting.
What kind of feeling does summery have for you?
It has all of the senses involved. So it has the smell of summer, whether it's fresh cut grass or the smell of grass after the rain. It has the feeling of sun on your skin, that warmth inside, that desire to be active and to feel energy to go outward and be social. So very happy and uplifting, and that's what summery makes me feel like.
So, because what we find is that the way you describe your childhood favorite, actually, what was the flower?
So it was actually a plant that I don't recall the flower for, but it sheep sorrel.
Oh, wow.
And so one of my earliest childhood memories of interacting with plants was a camp counselor of mine teaching me that I could pick up the sheep sorrel and eat it. And so like a little forage trick. And it was one of the most exciting things of my childhood. I actually loved it. And it was very calming for me. I think I had a difficult stomach as a child. And so this was probably, unbeknownst to me, something that settled my stomach.
Wow. And what does it taste like?
It's very lemony, kind of like that mineral-rich green lemony flavor. So I was also surprised that you could get the flavor of a lemon when you weren't having a lemon. So it was like a nature's trick.
That's so great. I love that.
Yeah.
So what we find is that how you would describe your childhood favorite would describe the way that you bring your greatest gifts into the world. So I would say using all of your senses, right, in your rituals and your work, you most likely intrigue people to really tap into their senses. Warmth, active, outwardly vibrant, social, happy, tasty, uplifting, soothing, summery, therapeutic. That sounds like you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Thanks.
So how did you get into herbalism?
So the journey for me to herbalism was in my early 20s, I was battling addiction, actually. So I was really consumed with excessive alcohol use and a couple other things that I didn't really have control over. And so I started to feel myself not feeling well in the morning if I was having a late night out or if I was excessively partying. And so I realized that my health at some point intuitively was sort of like a bank account, like that you're born with a certain amount of savings and you could withdraw and withdraw and withdraw. But one day, if you don't start putting money in the savings account, you're going to run out of money. And I saw my health that way. So I became very interested in what I could do to kind of replenish my savings account that I was depleting, like, and without looking at the psychological effects, that comes later. But so I started researching different remedies and it brought me back to nature. And so that is sort of how I started doing that. And I realized that what I was essentially doing is learning how to nourish. And that is a practice that I use now, with all of my clients. The first step of really working towards wholeness and whole health is by nourishment. And so that was sort of my journey to becoming an herbalist. And then really what led me, the next step was I got bit by a tick, my 30th birthday on May 30th, which is my birthday. And that led me to an herb shop downtown New York called Flower Power. And I went in there and they gave me a whole list of things that I could try. And I was so fascinated by all these options of plant remedies and why did they choose chaga for me and what was nettles. And I didn't know all these things. So they referred me to Richard Mandelbaum, and he took my call and he heard me saying, I was bit by a tick, and he specializes in Lyme disease. And he sat on the phone with me for almost an hour without any type of consultation fee or even telling me that he was the founder of a school when I told him I was interested in learning more. And he was so humble and so generous with his knowledge. And so I was really inspired by that. And I thought, what kind of a human does that? I want to be like that. So I ended up enrolling in Arbor Vitae School of Traditional Herbalism shortly after having that lovely interaction with him and going on my herbal protocol, in which I've thankfully been living Lyme-free since.
Yay!
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so much to talk about. Okay, so when you said the word nourish, it set off all the dinging bells, because you have no idea how common of a topic that is with, across so many different types of conversations on the podcast. Is our culture's sort of difficulty at making that leap to nourishing ourselves. It's one thing to, self-care is a word that's so commonly used, but I think we're really good at just kind of get by, bare minimum.
Yeah, totally. Definitely.
So this whole concept of nourishing ourselves with food and nourishing ourselves with nutritive tonics and teas, and it's a pretty radical concept, ironically. Do you find that with your clients?
Yeah, I find a lot of them don't realize the importance, though, of nourishment initially. I think most people, if they have a familiarity with herbalism or using plant-based remedies for their health, are more apt to reaching for the more stronger performance-based herbs that I think are maybe step 2 after nourishment for some people, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. And so I actually find myself educating a lot of people on how to nourish before jumping into depending on where they are, in their 6 steps and of healing. And that's really, the Susan Weed Wise Woman tradition, in which I am profoundly influenced by. So I find that people understand nourishment, but they don't always intuitively think it's their first step or amongst their first steps.
Do you want to talk about the 6 steps a little bit and why nourishment is number 1?
Well, actually, it's funny because the first step really in the Wise Woman tradition is like to do nothing and to wait and just see, and then like step 2 is kind of like collecting information and really just like low tech diagnostics, reference books, support groups, things like that. And then step 3 is to nourish and tonify. Mm-hmm. And that's really where the nourishment comes in. And that would be like your medicinal herbal infusions, your mineral rich infusions. And an herbal infusion would be very different than a culinary tea, which some think, the teas like nettles, for instance, you can get a tea bag and steep it for 3 to 15 minutes. But therapeutic grade materials of that tea are really expressed in a longer medicinal 8-hour steep. And that would be what a nourishing infusion is.
Can you go a little deeper into that when you do that for yourself? What are the steps that you take to do that? And what are the herbs that you would turn to start with?
So when I need deep nourishment, if I've had a very busy, stressful, or depleting time in my life, I go through a couple of weeks where I make medicinal overnight infusions. I find that the overnight aspect makes things a little bit easier. So I do the Susan Weed way, which is how I've been kind of taken in and what works for me and for also my clients. And that means I take about an ounce of herb to about 4 cups of just boiled water, and I let the herbs sit for about 8 hours. So I'll do that with my evening ritual of preparing for bed. So some herbalists call it sleep hygiene. Some don't like that, but I find myself just using it anyway. But as I, dim the screens an hour before bed, and I'm getting my, no blue lights, and I have my peaceful, smells good, whether I have essential oils or I'll ritually smudge for peaceful sleep and kind of make sure it's pitch black, and unless I'm practicing lunaception. And then in that case, I might leave a little bit of light around the full moon. But during the new moon, I always sleep in complete darkness. And then I will prepare the herbs, and I'll leave them overnight, and I'll strain in the morning, and I'll drink about 4 cups the next day throughout the day. I find that drinking herbs throughout the day greatly improves my overall well-being, as opposed to just having a cup in the morning or a cup in the evening. Of course, we can't always drink tea all day long, but if you're able to, it's very helpful.
So it's as simple as just measuring out an ounce, tossing it into a jar, pouring that just boiled water over, putting the top in the jar, and then you can strain it the next morning and put it in, say, like a thermos or your water bottle, and take that through.
Exactly.
And do you use nettles or horsetail, or what are your favorites?
So my favorite herbs for overnight infusions for nourishment are usually the wild invasive edible herbs that Mother Nature so abundantly provides to us. And that can be, yes, nettles. Stinging nettles are a wonderful, mineral-rich, nutritive herb. However, over time, for me, I tend to be on the dry side, so they can be a little drying for me. So I really like to pair them with something that's also moistening and doesn't deplete my, yin energy too much. And so I might add in a couple of the other options, which would be either oat straw, which is super mineral rich and very calming for the nervous system. It's really rich in magnesium. So that's a really great option for the elderly as well, that are really depleted and need that magnesium, which we don't often get so much in our diet these days. And so that would also add in red clover, which is very balancing. And what a lot of people don't know about red clover is it actually has a special affinity for the lungs. So it can be deeply healing for anyone that has anxiety that's centered around breathing or the lungs. It can have that dual effect. So I find it calming and nourishing, and also a mild nervine, which is a class of herbs that calm and soothe the nervous system. So in addition to red clover, I also really like to add mullein. And now with the solstice yesterday, mullein is a very solar herb. It really shines in the summer and has that energizing effects that I find. It's so nourishing. It has lots of minerals, but what it nourishes is the fluids in the body, the synovial fluid and the lungs, and your ability to breathe deeply. It allows more oxygen into the body. And so when we're dry and tired and overworked, I find it to be really replenishing to add mullein, an 8-hour mullein infusion.
Mm. And when you say synovial fluid, you mean the little fluids inside our joints, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we were prone to getting achy joints, that would be a good one.
Yeah. And most people think of it primarily as a lung herb, and it is, but it also has that benefit.
So because these, like the red clover and the mullein, because they're good lung herbs, would you also say that inadvertently they're good for grief or grieving?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I see that pattern very clearly in a lot of clients. I notice, if you are familiar with tongue diagnostics, when you look at the tongue and you see very deep cracks along the center line as you go down the tongue, you might notice that can be an indication of grieving, or a type of grief in a person's life. And so sometimes when I see that indication, I also check for other patterns, and also emotional assessment. It's very important to look at the whole picture, but very commonly I do think of these herbs for those lung and grief patterns.
Okay, so I kind of want to go back to the 6 steps to know what the rest of the 6 steps are, but then this conversation is also leading me to want to ask you, and we can do that after the 6 steps, but what herbs beyond nutritive, if someone were having a rough time, what they might include in those infusions. Okay, but first the 6 steps.
Right. So, that sort of answers. So the 4th step sort of answers that question, because after you nourish and tonify, so like, let's say you have like leaky atopic like tissue in the body, and you're smoothing and toning and rebuilding, then you either stimulate or sedate the body, depending on what a person needs. And that would be the next step. So stimulating could be exciting or enlivening, or bringing the body back up to its optimal well-being. Or on the contrary, if a person is overly stimulated and high-strung and in overdrive, then you might want to sedate and calm and soothe. So that would be the next step after nourishment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can talk about some herbs that, that might fit into those process if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thought that came into my mind is, for the person who's just see so commonly is the person who's so overworked that they're exhausted. So then you might think stimulate because they're exhausted, but you also might think calm down because they're overworking, and how how you can use the herbs to sort of check all the boxes and bring somebody back into balance.
Totally, which is why the class of herbs called adaptogens are so powerful and effective, because they tend to have that dual action. They tend to work in the body and modulate and balance and really help the body achieve balance needed in the morning and in the evening. So if you are overworked and your cortisol levels are balanced due to stress, in the morning you might have that type of morning depression where you can't get out of bed and you're super fatigued and really struggling. But then in the evening, you're so high strung, you're wired and tired and you can't go to sleep. And so that would be where an adaptogen would come into handy, and depending on the person and how they're experiencing it. But let's say you have like a cold, depleted type of person that gets cold easily, always wearing a sweatshirt in the room, and that's their energetics. They might want a warming, stimulating adaptogen that also happens to help them calm down and quiet in the evening. And so a couple come to mind, but I happen to love ashwagandha, the Ayurvedic, lovely Ayurvedic adaptogen, and I can talk more about it. But in addition to that, I also love Siberian ginseng because it's gently warming for some people that might have a false heat, which is they feel hot, but really they have an underlying depletion. So Eleuthero or Siberian ginseng is really great also because it has that ability to really balance the body, but also with a neutral temperature.
Love that. And do you want to talk more about ashwagandha?
Yeah, so ashwagandha is warming and uplifting. And energetically, I found that ashwagandha is really helpful for people that are looking for a sense of self-acceptance. So people that are on that, and most people are, but on that journey where they're really learning to love themselves and finding that path, I think that ashwagandha really helps nourish the psyche in that way and to allow you to really love yourself. In addition to nourishment, it's a very, very nourishing adaptogen. It's commonly used for those that are also nourishing, but in the mineral-rich sense, but need that emotional and physical nourishment as well. And it tends to also upregulate mildly a slow, sluggish thyroid, which is common after many months of adrenal fatigue for a lot of people. And it helps with that wired and tired effect in the evening, but also gives you that energy in the morning. So a lot of people say, I would never take ashwagandha in the morning, and it puts me right out at night. But they don't realize that the same herb, if taken in the morning, can actually give them energy, while in the evening will help them fall asleep.
So brilliant. Isn't Mother Nature brilliant?
Nature is so fantastic.
So would those adaptogens fit into your stimulate versus or sedate in step 4, or is that?
They totally would, yeah.
Okay. And then what happens in steps 5 and 6?
So step 5, which is not like obviously the first, you're going down to 5 at this point, would be to actually add supplements if needed. So if a person is having trouble absorbing a certain nutritional deficiency, then perhaps they would, use a synthesized or concentrated type of vitamin or mineral. So, or special foods like royal jelly or spirulina, something like that. And that would be more of a step 5A actually. And then you have like a step 5B, which would be using like actual drugs, like a synthesized concentrated vitamins or minerals and special kind of, or more like a synthesized alkaloid type oral or injectable hormones or highly diluted homeopathic remedies, stuff like that. And then finally, step 6, which would be Western medicine. And that would be like breaking and entering. So more of a surgical solution if needed.
I love that you do the nourish and tonify before you even think about supplements, right? Because was it Rosalie de la Forêt? I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she said something about we don't really have a food deficiency so much as a plant deficiency. Like we're just not eating enough plants. And so my goodness, can you imagine if all of us are doing these 8-hour infusions? We'd be getting so many vitamins and minerals, and then we may not even need to supplement, is the point, right?
Exactly. I think that most people would find that if they're having a plate of vegetables with every meal, they're not, well, let's say they're not their whole healthy self. So if they had a plate of vegetables with every meal, if they drank mineral-rich infusions every day, I think the need for supplementation would drastically be reduced.
Love that. Okay. And then what sorts of herbs could you add once you'd been really nourished by some of these mineral dense herbs? What might you add to to just keep a calm mood during the day?
So since I study with Richard Mandelbaum, this kind of diverges from the wise woman tradition, and he has more of a combination of, he has a strong background in Chinese medicine and diagnostics, and same with, I think, David Winston. And so what I do is kind of mix both the wise woman and with the Richard Mandelbaum kind of ideal, which is wise woman is usually maybe 1 or 2 herbs, or even sitting with 1 herb for a couple of months, while Richard uses more like a 6 to 7 herb formulation. And I really identify with that because you can really balance out side effects from a single herb. Like if the herb is super drying, you can pair it with a couple other herbs. Or if you want the herb to really go to the bottom half of your body, maybe you'd pair it with an herb that helps improve circulation. So kind of the art of formulation is really what I take on from learning from Richard. And so when it comes to that stimulate and sedate option, what I like to do is pair adaptogens and nervines, and occasionally sedative nervines, nervines are the class of herbs that soothe the nervous system and work in many different ways on stress and anxiety in the body. So what's fascinating about them is that each herb has medicinal value in different stressful circumstances. So you can use an herb that is specific for anxiety that causes tension in the upper shoulders, neck, and jaw. For instance, blue vervain or Verbena hastata, which is a wonderful nervine that has a lot of benefits besides aiding stress and anxiety, like digestion and liver support. But it's really specific for people that are stressed and grind their teeth. So I might put the formulation of blue vervain with a blend of adaptogens. And for instance, maybe I would put blue vervain with nutritive milky oats and an adaptogen like tulsi, which really helps balance and helps reduce stress and anxiety and works on the adrenals and stress hormones like cortisol. And then I might add something like prickly ash, which is stimulating circulatory tonic, and really watch the synergy of these plants working together.
Love that. So I imagine you get a ton of opportunities to learn and watch and research as you're working with different clients. And you're also in 2 of New York City's most bustling kind of centers of herbalism in terms of commerce. 2 questions for you. One is what types of people do you see in Flower Power versus Alchemist Kitchen, and what are they coming in saying they're looking for a particular remedy for XYZ?
Right. So we have a very different clientele. Flower Power is sort of an institution in New York City, has been around for 25 years now. And we have customers coming in from all across the area, New York area, from all the boroughs, from outside of New York, as a really trusted source for organic herbs. And I did want to credit Latat Kennedy, who is the founder of the shop and a huge mentor of mine, who is the one who really passed down the wise woman tradition and the Susan Weed way to me. And that's how I sort of embodied that is from Latat. And so the clients that have been coming there are really coming for sometimes their primary source of medicine. And so you have a large customer base that are from the outer boroughs of New York, the Afro-Caribbean community, that come from generations of using medicinal plants and as their primary source of medicine. And so I've learned so much from these communities. And then we also have our downtown East Village community that has always been coming, and that includes families, it includes high school men and women, or boys and girls, I should say, and really just a lot of ritual use of plants as well. We have a lot of men and women that come, and boys and girls that come for the ritual use of plants and also for flower essences. So that's a huge aspect. And I must say, then we have the Alchemist Kitchen, and that has very much a 21st century lifestyle, busy, overworked type of working crowd, conscious consumer that really is interested in plant knowledge, but not necessarily kind of aware of how to use it. And so they're asking questions like, what will my family do if we can't have access to a medical doctor in a foreign country? What could we bring with us? How can I get to sleep after a long day suffering from work anxiety, stress, and pressure without using harsh pharmaceutical drugs? How can I lift myself out of the depression of losing a loved one or breaking off a relationship? Is there a natural way to quit smoking or beat addiction? So all of those things people come. And I will say that in the Alchemist Kitchen, we actually do sell a lot of LOTUSWEI flower essence sprays. And
Yay!
I get a lot of feedback on how, oh, I love this product. Oh, I love this. They call it a product. They don't really understand that it's medicine. They just don't get it. This product, I get that all the time. I'm like, if they, but that's something that we're changing. We're starting to educate people. And that's why we have herbalists, working at the Alchemist Kitchen to really teach people that, I try to explain to people that it's kind of like doing electromagnetic acupuncture in the room, as just kind of moving out the vibrations of like fear, sadness, anxiety that are existing in our space. And so that's kind of what these sprays are so lovely and are offering so many clients that come in. But so those are kinds of some of the issues that people come in for.
And when you say rituals, tell me more about that.
So we have a lot of people that understand there is a, quote, magical, quote, use of herbs and a long history and traditional practice of using herbs for charms or attracting rituals, as well as healing broken heart rituals or cleansing rituals. So some people they can feel tied energetically to other humans, and they might feel it's time to separate that tie, and they would use specific herbs to do that. So like a couple herbs that also can be really great for attracting certain things. And there's herbs that are great for court cases. Who would have known? So there's actually an herb that works magically on court cases. It's called cinquefoil, and it's for the favorable outcome in court cases and many other things. It's a very magical plant. And are you familiar with the flower essence?
No, I'm not. I've only heard and seen the plant.
So definitely, if you are able to meet cinquefoil in near future, experiment. It should be, yeah.
Deal. What about for healing broken heart and cutting ties to others?
So for healing broken heart, this may not be novel to many of you if you're herbalists, but my first and go-to is always hawthorn. So the hawthorn berry and flowers and leaf are essential for healing the broken heart. They are similar to, actually this article came out in the New York Times a couple of years ago that if you have a broken heart, you should take aspirin, which I thought was
that's so
really
odd.
wild, because like you might be in physical pain, like your physical heart might actually hurt, so take an aspirin. And I was thinking like, that is so wild that they're saying this, like if they only had herbalists on hand. But actually hawthorn is a mild nervine and is very relaxing and nourishing for some people, even if you don't have a broken heart. But when you do, it really softens that space energetically and it allows you to process. So herbs don't numb us. They don't hide our emotions. They actually allow us to process them in a really magical way. So we are experiencing our emotions, but they aren't crippling us. We're able to continue forward and process and really still feel, as opposed to pharmaceuticals or alcohol or things that really, or even, over-the-counter drugs that do numb us. So I find hawthorn has that effect for a broken heart. It allows us to process our grief and while keeping our heart open for experiencing joy.
What about cutting ties?
So for cutting ties, I really, first and foremost, I practice the ritual of combusting herbs. So using herbal smokes or for inhalation and exhaling out, the energy you want to leave, and So even whether it's lobelia or mullen, there's many different herbal smoke blends. But I also really like smudging, which is the ritual practice of burning herbs for their smoke. And so that fire, it ignites the herb, and the smoke raises our intention of what we want to purify or cleanse, to the heavens. That's what the natives of this land believed. And so we can use these powerful master teacher plants like sage, white sage, to cleanse the energy of any living thing, and including ourselves, or anything with an energy like a rock or even a piece of furniture. So that will change the vibration, and especially with your intention in that way. So having that intention or saying that prayer is what really helps manifest the outcome.
And I noticed on your website that you offer a class on the ritual of yoni steaming. And I think that's kind of like an up and coming trend. It's also like an ancient practice done in the bathhouses of Korea, right? I remember one time one of my best friends and I were traveling for business, and we had some of our flower essences and chocolate were at this really beautiful Korean bathhouse, and it was my friend's birthday. And so the woman who ran the bathhouse she called them V steams, because it was how she had been able to get pregnant after many, many years of infertility. And so she, was really making a big deal about this. And she said, it's your birthday. I have to gift you this. So fast forward 20 minutes, we're like huddled under these little vinyl kind of like shower curtain things, sitting over these steaming pots of herbs. And I thought, this is so brilliant. And a concept that may make Westerners initially sort of like step back, but incredibly interesting and healing. And I wondered if you wanted to dive into the whole art of, as you call, yoni steaming.
Yeah, I would love to. So it is an ancient practice that extends throughout Asia, and also even in Central America and South America. Women in Ecuador, they practice vaginal steaming or V-steaming or yoni steaming, which yoni was the Sanskrit word for vagina, and after childbirth, so postpartum steams, and that was to renew and restore the tissue of the area of the body, but also to take the energy of the plants for healing. And so yoni steaming can really be a practice for a lot of different feminine issues. So from soothing menstrual cramps, relieving PMS symptoms like nausea, gas, bloating, bladder, and uterus spasms. What it does is, the reason why it works on these things is that the volatile oils from the plants travel in the steam, and the steam is warm. So you're relaxing the tissue with this warm steam, and then the tissue relaxes, and it's moist, and it takes in the volatile oil of the plants and delivers that medicine exactly where it needs to go. And so, as opposed to just drinking a tea for your vaginal area, which can work, but this is way more effective. And then you're also kind of putting yourself in this meditation, where in this ritual, which is truly an act of self-love, because you are taking these herbs and you're telling your womb space, I know you're there, and I am going to honor you, and I'm going to nourish you by using these herbs with these power that each have their own intention. So lemon balm is an herb, for instance, that is very dear to our womb and our heart when we're feeling tender after a breakup, as we were talking about, or grief of any kind, because she physically can support the calming of anxiety and eases the heart palpitations, nervous headaches and indigestion, and emotionally supports clearing negative self-talk. I find lemon balm to be super mood elevating, and just nurtures our wounded spirit with a very motherly vibe. A lemon balm, I find, is so soothing for children also. But in this case, it's great for a broken heart, just on that topic. But so just in general, the plant kingdom is just a host to many protectors of our feminine spirit and physical body. And so using these herbs in a steam really has that capacity. And my sister and I wanted to really educate women on the power of yoni steaming for so many different emotional and physical benefits. And so we started a company called Sacred Lotus Yoni Steam. I'm really private side of it. I just work really on personal consults and people really want to dive into their own customized steam blends. But her and her partner put the business together. She really felt it would be empowering to have a man also part of a Yoni Steam effort, to have really that divine feminine and masculine energy, and with the hopes that one day men will be preparing for their women, or the masculine or the feminine, however that works, whichever you identify with, to support the two to come together to help really nourish that aspect. So Yoni steaming can also go in partnership with a practice of using yoni eggs. So if you're familiar with that, it is the practice of using a crystal in the shape of an egg that would be inserted inside for different empowering exercises, and sometimes doing yoni egg and steam rituals in ceremony with your sisters is a way to really empower yourself and heal. So community steaming is a practice that we are bringing to women across America. And we have one retreat coming up this July. So on a beautiful sacred medicinal farm called Ravencrest Botanicals.
That sounds amazing. And can you also turn to yoni steaming for infections or things that are a little more serious, like cysts and endometriosis? Or is there any contraindications, can we pretty much assume that it's going to be helpful no matter the severity of, nourishing, versus is it still okay if there's some more serious issue going on?
Steaming is so gentle, but also so powerful. And I do think for most vaginal issues that steaming is a safe and effective way. However, if you have a UTI, we don't suggest you steam. It can be harmful for that. I mean, sorry, not UTI. I meant IUD. Whoa, big difference. UTI is wonderful. But if you have an IUD inserted, you want to not steam. And if you're on your moon cycle, to wait to steam until in between your cycles. So besides that, unless you have a type of an infection that is really uncommon, that you want to be extra careful and go a different route. But I'm not really aware of anything at this time that I wouldn't suggest it for in that case.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's lovely. And will you be having more retreats in the future?
Very likely, none on deck, but always in moment by moment basis.
Cool. And are there any areas of herbalism that you're really curious about, or that you find yourself exploring, that are, sort of like the next frontier for you personally?
Well, I tend to be attracted to oddities. So using this kind of area in my practice may not be for a while, but I'm always very fascinated with medicinal herbs that are toxic. So herbs that in high doses can kill you, but in low doses are deeply medicinal. I happen to use one for my own health and well-being during a period where I was having thyroiditis, or imbalance in my thyroid glands. And Matthew Wood was the one who assessed that, the herbalist that really he took one look at me and knew exactly what was going on. And he just said, 3 drops of blue flag iris 3 times a day. And within 4 months, I'd never had the issue again. So it was pretty powerful for me, but in high doses, it's a toxic herb. So I'm just really fascinated by that, and always kind of interested in that duality of plants and the therapeutic index, which would be the level of toxicity that plants have. But for my practice and for clients and people that I'm working with, I generally tend to work with safe herbs that are non-toxic and almost, very challenging to overdose on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in wrapping up, is there any sort of wisdom or insights or recommendation or something that you find yourself saying to a lot of people lately that you want to share?
Yeah, well, right now, I think at this time, people are trying to keep up with machines. And that's just what it seems like to me. It's like we're racing against machines and we're trying to really move as fast as a computerized bionic part. And so I think my greatest, message that I'm working on for myself and really with other people is to really be patient and give yourself the space to grow and not to expect, massive amounts of healing in short amounts of time, and to become a transformed person overnight, and give patience to yourself to really flourish, and give yourself credit for the obstacles that you already have overcome, and take that time to honor yourself and on all of your accomplishments, and really to have that, that space. And you can do that with rituals, and that sometimes plants are not the first, modality of healing, that sometimes it might be just meditation or a forest bathing. Then some, Richard Mandelbaum says that the most powerful adaptogen is actually mindfulness. So as cliche as that might sound, but it's really, so
That's good.
Just going into that space of really honoring yourself for all that you've accomplished, and giving yourself the time to be who you are.
Love that. Such a fascinating conversation with you. I think we'll definitely have to get you to come back, because I feel like we've just barely gotten into it.
Oh,
There's so much more. So thank you for spending time with us.
thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your show, Katie.
We'll see you soon in New York.
See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Flower Lounge podcast. We now have listeners in 61 countries, and I just want to say that I am so grateful that you'd spend your time with us. I also want to take a second to give a shout out to LOTUSWEI, who makes this podcast possible. We recently released a new flower essence blend that has been a game changer for us. In fact, it's called Game Changer, and it's a combination of the most powerful flower essences for being totally present. Because if you, like me, you might have experienced on occasion having a really big to-do list, a little overwhelming, feeling constantly on the go, and the sense that time is flying by. Like, where did last week go? You may want to check out the Game Changer. It makes you feel like you have all the time in the world. You can take breaks without feeling guilty like you should be doing something else. You feel crystal clear with the ability to make decisions really effortlessly. And things that seem kind of heavy or a pain in the butt on your to-do list to do before now just seem like super easy. So if you have gotten any value out of listening to the podcast, we'd love your support. We're currently under contract to buy a new building where we'll be able to open a store, have an education center, offer botanical treatments and flower elixir happy hours, and have a cool new podcasting space that will be a major upgrade from where we are now. So at that time in the fall, when we move into our new space, we will have had a year of podcasting under our belt, and we'll be starting up a whole new format that you're going to love that will be even more engaging and interactive. So again, thank you so much for your support, for listening, and for spending time with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to the Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.